After winning a vote on the 30th of September 1981, Seoul, the capital city of South Korea, was chosen to host the 1988 Summer Olympic Games. This was huge for South Korea and Seoul, specifically the Gangnam area of Seoul, which experienced a significant construction boom in the years leading up to the Games due to the money coming in. They decided, as this was quickly becoming one of the most fashionable parts of the city, to construct a high-end department store where shoppers could find everything under one roof. They would call this the Sampoong Department Store. During this period, there was a ban against international construction contractors to promote using South Korean-based companies. This meant that everything built in the area were built by South Korean companies. Due to the large number of projects these companies would get, they would often build their structures as fast as they could so they could get on to the next job. The contract was won by the Sampoong Group, and they began construction of the mall in 1987 on land that had previously been used as a landfill. Originally, a construction company, Woosung Construction, were hired for a different job. They were contracted to build an apartment complex. During the construction of the apartment complex, Lee Jun, chairman of the Sampoong Group, changed the blueprints to the department store plans and ordered for Woosung Construction to go ahead with the new plans. They outright refused because this involved removing a number of support columns in order to mount escalators and adding a fifth floor, which would make the building incredibly unsafe. They warned Lee this, but he wouldn't listen. In fact, Lee was so unhappy with Woosung Construction that he fired them all and used his own company to complete the construction instead. During construction, in order to get more floor space, Lee would reduce the floor columns by 7 inches to 24 inches rather than the 31 which was recommended to him for the building to be safe. He would also add the fifth floor, which consisted of 8 restaurants. As a result, the columns were carrying 4 times the full load they were intended to support. The icing on the cake came in the form of the air conditioning. 3 15-ton air-conditioned units were installed on the roof, which were 4 times the design limit. Despite all of this, the Sampoong Department Store opened to the public on July the 7th, 1990, after being completed in late 1989. Over the next few years, cracks began to appear in the ceiling, which again, Lee ignored. The number of cracks in the area increased significantly on the morning of June the 29th, 1995, causing managers to close portions of the top floor. Banging was then heard from the roof, which was the air conditioning, causing cracks to widen further. Lee still didn't shut the building down, as they didn't want to lose a day's revenue. Customers began to complain about the vibrations, which caused them to turn the air conditioning off. An emergency board meeting was held, and directors urged Lee to shut down the store and evacuate everyone inside immediately. Lee angrily refused, but left the building himself. An engineer was then called out to check the cracks. As the engineer was examining the slabs, the floor opened up. It was approximately 5:52 p.m. when staff began seeing and hearing the cracks. They sounded the alarm, but it was too late. The roof collapsed and the air conditioning units smashed into the already overburdened 5th floor. All of the columns in the store's south wing then gave way, and in less than 20 seconds began pancaking into the basement. Park Seung-hyun, a 19-year-old employee, described the moment as it happened. She said, "From across the store there was a sound like a subway train entering the station, and when we heard that sound, people started running here and there. Suddenly, a piece of concrete dropped on my head and I was knocked unconscious. After I awakened, I was completely surrounded by darkness and all sides around me were closed in. There wasn't any room. I cried for help and banged on the steel pipe beside me, but they couldn't hear me from the outside." This collapse resulted in the deaths of 502 people and trapping a further 1,500 inside. Emergency services were on the scene in minutes. Although the mayor had originally called off the rescue operation due to fears of a further collapse, protests compelled officials to continue to look for survivors, but this wasn't an easy task. One firefighter told a Discovery Channel documentary, "Generally speaking, the rescue equipment proved to be ineffective in a large-scale disaster. The rescue equipment consisted of a heat detector, sonic detectors, equipment that could even detect human breath, search dogs, etc. However, because everything was crumbled and buried underground with over 500 casualties, even the dogs were ineffective. Because this area was large and so chaotic, electronic heat detector was no use. Even though we used large cranes, we were worried about the possibility that there could be some survivors underneath, that they may be crushed, so we lifted all the pieces, one by one." After a week, the priority was clearing the debris, but the construction teams were vigilant to search for the victims. The last person to be rescued was 19-year-old Park Seon-hyun, who was pulled from the wreckage after 17 days. She survived off rainwater. She described the moment when she was rescued. "I hear loud machinery above my head and think, this is it, I'm going to die. I start banging with all my might. The machines stop and I hear a voice call out, 'Is anybody down there?' I am. And now I am thinking I will be saved. I am going to live." After the collapse, the investigation team looked into a few things. The first was a possible gas leak, and the second was a terrorist attack. These were both quickly ruled out. They then looked into the cause of the structural failure. The investigation found that the floors and walls were built on a substandard cement and seawater concrete mix and poorly reinforced concrete. They found that the building was built incorrectly, using a fat slab construction method, which does not use beams but supports the floor slab directly on the columns. Investigators also found that the 3 air conditioning units had been moved 2 years prior to the collapse due to noise complaints from neighbours on the east side of the building. During the investigation, Lee wasn't concerned at all with the lives lost, but was only upset about the financial damage that had happened to his company. Lee Jun was convicted of criminal negligence and sentenced to 10.5 years in prison on December 27, 1995. This was later lessened after an appeal to 7.5 years. His son, Lee Han-san, CEO of the store, was also sent to prison for 7 years. Multiple officers were also sent to prison after accepting bribes from Lee over the years. Payouts of $220,000 were given to each of the victims. Lee Jun died on October 4, 2003 due to diabetes. He had only just been released from prison. His son was released in 2002 and now works as an evangelist in Mongolia. The initial response to the disaster was widespread public outrage, which resulted in months of public demonstrations and protest on Seoul's streets. People were concerned that all of the buildings built during the construction boom weren't safe, which led to a review of South Korean safety regulations. The store was demolished shortly after, and this disaster remains the largest peacetime disaster in South Korean history.